Maple Brook was a picturesque town known for its serene landscapes, charming cottages, and tight-knit community. Nestled in the rolling hills, the town seemed to be a place where time stood still. Its cobblestone streets, lined with ancient oak trees, felt like a page from a storybook. The heart of the town was St. Thomas Church, an old building with stained glass windows and towering spires, standing proudly at the center. The church had always been a symbol of hope and unity, a place where people gathered every Sunday to worship, share stories, and offer prayers. Father Joseph Collins, the church's pastor for the past 2 decades, was a beloved figure in Maple Brook. He was a kind-hearted man who had dedicated his life to serving the community. Known for his gentle nature and unwavering faith, Father Collins had an almost fatherly presence in the town. He was more than just a religious leader. He was a friend, a counselor, and a confidant to many. People often sought him out for guidance, knowing he would listen with patience and understanding. The church itself was a central part of the town's identity. Generations of families had been married there, baptized, and laid their loved ones to rest in its hallowed grounds. St. Thomas had witnessed countless milestones, both joyous and sorrowful. It was more than just a building, it was a repository of memories, a symbol of continuity in a world that was ever-changing. But one cold autumn morning, everything changed. Father Collins was found dead inside his study, an office that overlooked the church's lush garden. The discovery was made by a local parishioner, Miss Ellis, who had arrived early to prepare the altar for the morning service. The sight that greeted her when she entered the study was nothing short of shocking. Father Collins was slumped over his desk, his body stiff and lifeless. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, and the room was undisturbed. His eyes were wide open, as though he had been staring at something terrifying, and in his hand was a crumpled piece of paper with something scribbled hastily on it. It read, "The truth lies beneath." The police arrived quickly, led by Officer Thompson, the local sheriff. Maple Brook was a quiet town, and the occurrence of such an event was rare, if not unheard of. There had been no history of violence in the community, no reports of suspicious activity. The idea that a murder could take place in such a peaceful setting was inconceivable. The initial investigation revealed no clear cause of death. There were no visible wounds, and the cause of death couldn't be determined by a simple examination. Was it a natural death, a heart attack, or had something more sinister occurred? As news of Father Collins' death spread through Maple Brook, shock and disbelief swept over the town. People gathered outside the church, whispering in hushed tones, unable to comprehend how such a tragedy could have befallen their beloved priest. The sense of safety and tranquility that had defined the town was now shattered. In the midst of this turmoil, a strange question lingered in the air. What could Father Collins have meant by his final message? The town was about to find out, but the truth would prove to be far darker and more complex than anyone could have imagined. Maple Brook's peaceful image was about to be ripped apart, revealing hidden secrets, buried histories, and a web of lies that had been spun over generations. No one knew it yet, but the small town was about to be thrust into a nightmare it would never escape. The church, which had been a place of solace for so many, would soon become the center of a mystery that would haunt Maple Brook forever. Detective Miller was called to Maple Brook as soon as the news of Father Collins' death reached the local authorities. He had solved his fair share of high-profile cases, but something about this one felt different. Maple Brook had always been known for its peaceful, idyllic atmosphere, and the thought of a murder occurring in this quiet town seemed almost impossible. But as the sheriff's office was stretched thin, Miller, a seasoned investigator from the nearby city, was sent to lend his expertise. When Miller arrived, the town seemed frozen in time. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the sleepy streets, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. People stood in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously around. The news had shaken the town to its core, and nobody seemed to know how to process the enormity of what had occurred. The church, usually a place of solace, had turned into a crime scene. The familiar structure that had stood as a symbol of unity for generations now felt ominous, its towering spires casting long shadows over the town. Miller made his way inside the church, where he was greeted by Officer Thompson. The sheriff seemed as bewildered as anyone else, but his calm demeanor suggested that he was doing his best to maintain control over the situation. Inside, the study where Father Collins had been found was sealed off, and a few officers were milling around, taking notes and trying to gather any possible evidence. The room was dimly lit by the weak light filtering through the dusty windows. There was an eerie stillness in the air, as if the room itself had been waiting for something dark to occur. Miller took a moment to examine the scene. The desk was cluttered with papers, books, and a half-empty mug of coffee, but there was no sign of a struggle. Father Collins' body had been positioned strangely, as if he had been slumped over in a sudden, unnatural way. His hand still clutched the piece of paper, the cryptic message scribbled on it almost mocking the investigators who would come after him. The truth lies beneath. Miller couldn't help but wonder what Father Collins had meant by those words. Was it a clue? Or had the priest, in his final moments, been trying to warn someone about something hidden deep within the town's history? The more Miller looked around, the more he realized how little he knew about Father Collins, despite his reputation in the town. Most people spoke highly of him, but there were whispers, small, almost imperceptible rumors that something wasn't quite right with the priest. Some said he had been troubled in the weeks leading up to his death, acting distant and distracted, as though he were burdened by a secret he couldn't share. Miller had learned not to take rumors at face value, but they were enough to pique his curiosity. He spoke with the few townspeople who had known Father Collins best, starting with Miss Ellis, the parishioner who had found him dead. She was clearly shaken, her eyes red from crying, but she insisted that nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Father Collins had always been kind, and she had seen no sign of any trouble brewing. Yet, she admitted that in recent weeks, the priest had been more withdrawn, spending long hours in his study and often mumbling to himself as though he were struggling with something internal. She couldn't understand why, but she knew it wasn't like him. Miller also spoke with some of the town's more prominent families, who had been close to Father Collins over the years. Everyone had nothing but praise for him, but a few of the families seemed overly eager to distance themselves from the situation. They were quick to offer a libis, and were almost too willing to help with the investigation, as if they were trying to deflect any suspicion. The detective's instincts told him that something was off. These families, long considered pillars of the town, seemed to be hiding something, but what could it be? As Miller pieced together the information, one thing became clear: there was more to Father Collins' death than met the eye. The town had been hiding something, and whatever it was connected to the church. The more he uncovered, the more Miller felt that the investigation was just beginning. The peaceful town of Maplebrook, with its smiling faces and close-knit community, was beginning to show cracks that led straight to a dark and dangerous truth. Detective Miller's investigation took a more unsettling turn as he began to explore the cryptic message Father Collins had left behind. The truth lies beneath. What could it possibly mean? Miller had already examined the church's study and found nothing that pointed to a clear motive for the murder. But the message felt important, like a final clue from Father Collins, urging him to look deeper into the church itself. He knew that the town had a long history, and St. Thomas Church, with its centuries-old foundation, held many secrets. Could there be something hidden beneath the church, something that had remained untouched for generations? The idea that something might be buried under the church wasn't entirely new. Maplebrook, with its rich, if somewhat mysterious past, had long been a place where rumors about hidden treasures and dark secrets swirled. People often spoke of lost artifacts or relics from the town's early settlers, but no one had ever truly investigated these claims. Perhaps Father Collins had stumbled upon something from the past that could explain his death. Miller's first step was to visit the church's crypt, a place that had been sealed off for years. The crypt had once been a resting place for the town's deceased, but over time it had become unstable and was shut off to the public. Few people had ever ventured inside, and even fewer knew its true extent. But Miller was determined. If there was any truth to Father Collins' final message, the crypt would be the place to start. The old wooden doors to the crypt creaked as Miller pushed them open, their sound echoing eerily in the stillness of the church. The air inside was damp, heavy with the scent of mildew and age. The walls were lined with cobwebs, and the floor was uneven, with chunks of stone scattered about. As Miller stepped inside, the light from his flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the darkened space. His heart raced, not from fear but from the anticipation of what he might uncover. The crypt was not just a burial site but a labyrinth of hidden rooms and narrow passages. It was clear that no one had explored these areas in decades, perhaps even longer. Miller moved cautiously, scanning the walls for any signs of hidden compartments or markings that could indicate something buried. His flashlight settled on a small, weathered plaque embedded in the wall. It was a nameplate, one that had likely been part of an older tomb. But as he examined it more closely, he noticed something peculiar, a small, almost invisible crack in the stone surrounding the plaque. His pulse quickened. Could this be a hidden passageway? With careful hands, Miller pried at the crack, and after a few moments of effort, the stone panel loosened and fell away, revealing a dark, narrow space behind it. Miller's heart pounded as he stepped into the hidden alcove. It was smaller than the rest of the crypt, almost like a secret room, and it was filled with dust and old artifacts. But what caught his attention was a series of journals, several thick volumes stacked neatly in one corner, their leather covers faded with age. Miller carefully picked up the first journal, wiping away the layers of dust. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting was still legible. The journal appeared to belong to Father Collins, or at least it was written by someone close to the church. As he flipped through the pages, Miller realized that these journals were not ordinary records of religious matters. They were filled with notes on the town's history, specifically its founding families. The entries detailed strange rituals, long-forgotten events, and whispered legends of hidden treasures and dark practices that had been carried out in secret for generations. Some of the entries seemed to reference things that were buried deep beneath the church, both literally and figuratively. Miller could feel the weight of the discovery. These journals were more than just records, they were proof that Father Collins had been investigating something significant. He had been digging into the town's past, uncovering secrets that many would rather have stayed buried. But what had he uncovered? And why had he felt the need to keep it a secret, even from those closest to him? As Miller continued to read, one thing became painfully clear. Father Collins had been on the brink of revealing something dangerous, something that could destroy the reputation of Maplebrook's founding families. His research pointed to a series of rituals, some of them disturbing and occult in nature, that had taken place centuries ago. These rituals had been used to gain power, wealth, and influence, and they had been passed down through generations. The final entries in the journal hinted at a hidden treasure buried beneath the church that had been linked to these rituals. It was clear now that Father Collins had discovered the truth, and someone had silenced him before he could share it with the world. Miller closed the journal and felt a chill run down his spine. The investigation had taken a darker turn. There was something buried beneath the church, both in the physical sense and in the town's history, and someone in Maplebrook was willing to go to any lengths to ensure that these secrets stayed hidden forever. With the journals in hand, Detective Miller knew that the investigation had reached a crucial point. Father Collins had uncovered a dark secret about Maplebrook's founding families, a secret that, if revealed, could tear the town apart. The town, which had always prided itself on its peaceful, wholesome reputation, was now hiding a web of lies and buried truths. The treasure mentioned in Father Collins' journals was no longer just a myth. It was real, and it was tied to the very rituals that had shaped the town's history. Someone in Maplebrook had killed Father Collins to protect that secret, and Miller was determined to uncover who. The first place Miller decided to focus his attention was the church secretary, Clara Adams. She had been dismissed by Father Collins just days before his death. On the surface, Clara seemed like an innocent bystander. She had worked at the church for years and had always been professional in her duties. But there was something about her behavior that struck Miller as suspicious. People had noticed her acting strangely, as though she knew more about the priest's research than she let on. Clara had been seen visiting the church after hours, and her alibi for the night of Father Collins' death was shaky at best. Miller decided to confront her. Clara was visibly nervous when he arrived at her small cottage just on the outskirts of town. She invited him in, but her hands trembled as she poured him a cup of tea. Miller wasted no time getting to the point. He asked her about Father Collins, about his research, and whether she had any knowledge of the hidden treasure beneath the church. Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment it seemed as though she was about to confess. But instead she quickly composed herself and denied any involvement in the priest's death. She explained that Father Collins had been increasingly distant in the days leading up to his death. She had overheard him talking to someone on the phone, speaking in hushed tones about something dangerous and not meant for anyone else to find out. But Clara refused to go into any further details, insisting that she had no idea what Father Collins had uncovered. Despite her protests, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was hiding something. Her connection to the church, her secretive behavior, and the fact that she had been one of the last people to see Father Collins all made her a prime suspect. But as Miller left her cottage, he knew he needed more than just suspicions. He needed hard evidence. The next person on his list was Robert Hamilton, a wealthy local businessman with ties to some of the town's oldest families. Hamilton had been seen at the church several times in the days leading up to the murder, often speaking with Father Collins in private. On the surface, Hamilton appeared to be a respectable man, a pillar of the community who had made his fortune through real estate. But Miller had learned that Hamilton's business dealings were far from above board. There had been rumors about his shady land acquisitions, and Miller suspected that Hamilton's interest in the church property had less to do with religion and more to do with the treasure beneath it. Miller paid Hamilton a visit at his opulent home, a sprawling mansion just outside Maplebrook. Hamilton greeted him with a smile, offering him a drink, but Miller could see through the facade. Hamilton was nervous, his eyes darting around the room as if he were waiting for something or someone to interrupt their conversation. When Miller brought up Father Collins and the priest's mysterious research, Hamilton's demeanor shifted. He became defensive, insisting that he had no knowledge of any treasure or hidden secrets beneath the church. But Miller could see the tension in his posture, the way his hands clenched around the armrest of his chair. As the conversation wore on, Hamilton's responses grew more evasive. He claimed that his interactions with Father Collins were purely professional, but Miller didn't believe him. The more Hamilton spoke, the more it became apparent that he was trying to cover something up. He had known about the priest's investigation, and it was clear that the businessman had a vested interest in keeping the town's dark past buried. Miller's suspicions were confirmed when he learned that Hamilton had recently purchased several properties near the church. He was attempting to gain control of the land, a move that would have been much easier if the church were no longer in operation. The hidden treasure Father Collins had been researching could have been the key to Hamilton's plans, and Miller was now certain that Hamilton had played a role in the priest's death. But there was still one more suspect, Father Collins' estranged cousin Paul Collins. Paul had returned to Maplebrook just days before the murder, claiming to want to reconnect with his family. But there was something off about his sudden appearance. Paul had been estranged from Father Collins for years, and his return was timed suspiciously close to the priest's death. His family had been involved in the town's founding, and they were rumored to have knowledge of the hidden treasure beneath the church. Miller tracked Paul down to an old family estate on the outskirts of town. Paul greeted him coldly, but Miller could sense an underlying tension in his words. When asked about his relationship with Father Collins, Paul became defensive, refusing to discuss their estrangement. He claimed that his cousin had been obsessed with the past, digging into things that should have been left alone. Paul's anger flared as he spoke, and Miller knew he had hit a nerve. Miller was now convinced that one of these three individuals, Clara, Hamilton, or Paul, was responsible for Father Collins' death. Each had a motive, each had secrets they were desperate to protect, and each had been involved in the priest's investigation in one way or another. The truth was beginning to take shape, but there were still many unanswered questions. One thing was clear. Father Collins had been killed to protect something far darker than anyone in Maplebrook could have imagined. As the investigation deepened, Detective Miller felt the weight of the truth closing in around him. The town of Maplebrook, with its pristine streets and idyllic charm, was no longer the peaceful haven it had once seemed. The dark secrets that had been buried for centuries were starting to surface, and the more he uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Father Collins had stumbled upon a conspiracy that threatened to destroy the very foundation of the town, and someone had killed him to keep it hidden. Miller had narrowed the suspects down to 3: Clara Adams, the church secretary, Robert Hamilton, the wealthy businessman, and Paul Collins, the estranged cousin of the deceased priest. Each of them had something to hide, and each had been linked to Father Collins in the days leading up to his murder. But the breakthrough came when Miller discovered a hidden journal, one that had not been part of the stack found beneath the church. The journal was written by Father Collins himself and detailed a meeting he had with Robert Hamilton just days before his death. In the journal, Father Collins wrote about Hamilton's growing desperation to control the church property and the rumors of a treasure hidden beneath it. The priest had suspected that the businessman was involved in the town's dark history and was willing to go to any lengths to keep the secret buried. Father Collins had confronted Hamilton, demanding that he reveal the truth about his involvement in the town's past. But Hamilton had denied everything. The priest had written that Hamilton had seemed nervous, almost frantic, and that he had warned Father Collins to stop digging into the town's history, telling him that some things were better left undisturbed. The journal entry was the final piece of the puzzle. Miller now understood that Hamilton had killed Father Collins to protect his secret. But there was more to it than just greed for treasure. Hamilton was part of a larger network of influential families who had been involved in the occult rituals centuries ago. These families had used the hidden treasure as leverage, controlling the town's wealth and power for generations. The truth was a dangerous thing, and if Father Collins had uncovered it, it would have exposed the town's darkest secrets to the world. Miller decided to confront Hamilton directly, knowing that the evidence he had gathered would be enough to bring him to justice. He arrived at Hamilton's mansion just as nightfall settled over Maplebrook, the mansion's windows casting long shadows across the driveway. Hamilton greeted him with a forced smile, but the tension in his eyes was unmistakable. The detective didn't waste any time. He told Hamilton that he knew about the treasure, the rituals, and the murders that had been committed to keep the secret alive. At first, Hamilton denied everything, but as Miller pressed him, his facade began to crack. The businessman's calm demeanor shattered, and the truth began to spill out. Hamilton admitted that he had been involved in the occult practices of the founding families, but he insisted that he had only wanted to protect the town's legacy, not destroy it. The treasure, he explained, was not just gold or jewels, it was a symbol of power, a key to the town's influence. Over the years, the families had used it to manipulate the community, ensuring that they remained in control. Father Collins had been getting too close to the truth, and Hamilton had feared what would happen if the priest exposed it. The murder had been a desperate attempt to silence him before he could reveal the full extent of the conspiracy. But Hamilton wasn't working alone. Clara Adams, the church secretary, had been complicit in the plot. She had been the one to alert Hamilton about Father Collins' research, and she had helped him gain access to the priest's study. She had been promised a share of the treasure in exchange for her silence. Paul Collins, too, had played a part, though in a different way. He had returned to Maplebrook to lay claim to the treasure, believing that it rightfully belonged to his family. He had been unaware of Hamilton's involvement, but once he had discovered the truth, he had tried to warn Father Collins. However, Paul's warning had come too late. By then, Father Collins had already uncovered too much. As Hamilton finished confessing, he looked defeated, as if the weight of his own actions had finally caught up with him. But Miller wasn't done yet. He pressed for one last piece of information, the location of the treasure. Hamilton hesitated, but eventually he relented. He led Miller to a hidden room beneath the mansion, where the treasure was supposedly kept. The room was filled with ancient artifacts, but none of them seemed to hold the value that Hamilton had promised.